All right, so this comes from a gamesindustry.biz article by James Batchelor. The article is Amazon patents method of grouping toxic players together online. And I just love this kind of thing. This is not the first foray anyone's ever had into doing this as a punishment for toxic players. But what's interesting about this is Amazon Technologies has filed an actual patent for a specific system that allows, quote, behavior-aware player selection for multiplayer electronic games, end quote. And it seems like, well, here, let's just read some of the text from this article. They're quoting the patent filing. It says, quote, while players may enjoy competing with others of a similar skill level, such systems naively assume that skill is the primary or only factor to players' enjoyment, end quote. And then it picks up later, quote, contrary to this assumption, players' enjoyment may depend heavily based on behaviors of other users with which they are paired, such as the proclivity of other players to use profanity or engage in other undesirable behaviors. Players who engage in such behaviors may be labeled as toxic by other players. One mechanism for dealing with such players is to isolate all toxic players into a separate player pool, such that one toxic player is paired only with other toxic players, end quote. And there's some discussion in the article about what constitutes toxic behavior. Is it just the use of profanity? And there's an acknowledgement that that is subjective to a degree. So it may be that players can designate what behaviors they feel is toxic in order not to be paired up with other players. And implementing something like that's going to increase matchmaking search times. Any filter you put on matchmaking, it's just going to increase that time. But I just thought this was interesting. I love it when people are really terrible online and they all get thrown together into one big unhappy family.
I think a lot about some of the stuff we've seen with like cheating and how people who cheat get paired with other people who cheat. And to me, like, that stuff is funny. Like, okay, you're using an aimbot and you're in a lobby with a bunch of other people using aim.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all this is saying is, like, look, we understand that toxic players ruin player experience, but we really need them in our player base. And so we're not going to actually deal with them. Instead, we're just going to make them deal with one another. But my big thing is, like, hey, just get them the fuck out of your game. And I understand that they're representing skin sales or character sales or loot box sales or what have you. But, like, hey, if you've got a system to detect toxic players to a accurate enough degree that you can start matchmaking them based off of their behavior, why don't you just use that to take action against their accounts to get them out of the game?
Yeah, especially with really egregious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my wife used to play online with me all the time, and she doesn't anymore. And I don't think this is the main driving reason, but it was something that made online play just awful for her. And I'm sure you guys have borne witness to it. The moment toxic gamers, hear a female voice in a lobby, they just start right in on sexual harassment and like that kind of thing. Yeah, like, they should be able to just drop them out of the game. I agree. This isn't funny to me anymore, Luke. You've ruined the story.
I'm sorry. I feel like you were coming in thinking
this
is
a great point. Because toxic players aren't going to be miserable that they're in an environment where they're free to be even more toxic. You're right.
It's just going to compound it, and then games that don't have these systems, they're just getting let off into the wild into those games where they've been trained to just escalate my shittiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and it's pointed out in this article, and I believe in the patent filing, it can be difficult to define toxic behavior. I mean, there's some behavior that is just obviously so heinous, such as obviously sexual harassment, throwing out racial slurs, that kind of thing is like so egregious that, and hacking, cheating, all that stuff. But like, yeah, the article points out that there's some stuff that is like profanity. Like, some people are comfortable with profanity, others aren't. Quitting games early. Like, some of this stuff, I don't even know if I would label it toxic. I think some of it is just like bad etiquette or bad behavior. How do you define that? How do you allow people to define that if you were to institute a system like this? and there are probably other ways to address some of that, like in terms of profanity. You could there are probably, and I know some games do this, you can like toggle on family friendly or not, and it'll like slot you into different servers or whatever with people who have chosen that setting. I agree with you, Lou. I think for the really egregious behavior, it's either like an all or nothing thing. You either have to get them out of the game or not. And I think other games have done. Actually, I think we may have talked about this in the past. Isn't there a game that's done this sort of similarly? Like if you're noted for cheating, it like packs all the cheaters into one lobby.
Yeah. There's been games that have done. I think Apex was doing that for a while.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah, and here's the thing: like with cheating, like aimbots and that kind of shit, I'm perfectly fine. Like, okay, go put them off in a lobby together. Because the thing is like, if a toxic person is being toxic to another toxic person, that's not going to affect their online play. Like that just rolls off their back. But if a cheater goes into a game with
worse.
Exactly. But if a cheater goes into a game with another cheater and is wondering why they're just constantly getting shit on, like that does ruin their experience. And I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah.
Like the behavioral stuff is different than the like I'm running an aimbot or whatever.
Yeah, it's like throwing them into a prison but with like no attempt to rehabilitate them.
Yeah. So like throwing them into a prison.
Yeah, throwing them into many prisons. Yeah, but like it's not throwing everybody who's acting poorly into one game. Maybe is probably not going to make them reconsider their ways.
Yeah,
it perhaps will just make them double down on what they're already doing.
Yeah. I don't know. I think like. That's another thing, like going into this next generation, not to go back to that conversation, but like I think Xbox especially is like more concerned about the online environment that they're creating for people to play in. And I think we're going to see more and more creative solutions coming with toxic behavior, but I don't think the solution is to create like an island of toxicity for people to be banished to. You know, like let's figure this out and like get these people out and show them that this is unacceptable and you don't have a space in our community, in our servers, in our game. So that's what I'd much rather see. Like, let's have Amazon patent a fucking backbone for some of these companies.
Ooh, burn.